First and foremost, come back. All is forgiven. You know, we need you. You know, I think everybody in the room just felt that that was a mixture of wisdom, common sense, and imagination. Your word absolutely required. And I have a fear that there's a lack of strategic design at work in this great city at the moment. I wanted to pick up a few things that you said, although I feel like starting with a book I've just read, which is called Australia's Unintended Cities. And I feel it's the great warning to us of the very need for strategic design, because we have been through, I think, a high period of Australia's unintended cities, and I don't think the results are all what we would want or indeed what we need. And just to give you some economic issues, and I felt that the part of the discussion that needed more discussion was around the role of economic function and its relationship to form and the built environment and land and space. And I know it was in there, and I think we could pull it out a bit more. But just to give you my own personal example of an embarrassment that I went through in discussing these matters with, well, actually, I didn't know that he was there, but the story is about Jan Gale. And about 2.5 years ago, I was down in Adelaide, and I was asked a question. And the question was, I realised that the implicit in the question was, what did I think of the work of Jan Gale? And I just found myself saying that I said I compared it to a discussion about artists. I said that, you know, there are people who do kind of small-scale, fine-grained art, like in streetscapes and stuff, and they're brilliant. And that's what Jan Gale in my head does, you know, sort of brilliant at that level of detail, as a kind of a miniaturist, I said. And then I said, but I like big picture thinkers to understand, you know, the structure of the city and the economics behind it. And I think of that as a big picture. And I think that Adelaide needs that rather than Jan Gale. And they just said, Jan Gale, what do you think about what Tim Williams has just said about you? So I think it's important to know who's in the room, you know. I like very much, and of course, I'm a historian, I believe in context, and I start big and work to the site. I think that's such a big idea. I do also think that the care about the notes in between as well as the notes is a pretty critical fact. I was quite pleased when I was working in the UK as an advisor to government that we did a piece of work with Commissioner of Architecture and the Built Environment. It was called Start with the Park, which was itself a revolutionary version of getting the structure right. I worry that we're in a city that's been designed by nobody at the moment. I worry that it's a city being designed actually by negative gearing. I feel very strongly, and the evidence is there to support me at this point in time. We've just increased the number of houses produced in this city, or homes, from 14,000 to 23,000 in 18 months, and 85% of them are west of Parramatta. And if we look at our economic facts of the last 10 years, only 3 local government areas have created any new net jobs in Sydney in the last 5 or 6 years: Ryde, City of Sydney, and North Sydney. So, you know, we are creating homes, not mixed-use places, and they're not connected well to transport and to jobs. That is the default model at the moment, it seems to me, for Sydney. So I like very much Jan's, I think, incendiary phrase, brilliantly expressed, that there's a confusion between real estate and city-making going on, and poor implementation is part of it. But I wanted to sort of say that I suppose where not my disagreement, because I think that what you've set out is a great agenda for understanding the technical requirements of city making, and they cannot be gainsaid, and I thought they were brilliantly expressed. And your experience of working in places, you know, it's not just theoretical. You've built this understanding up from context back to the local, and then bringing it back up to the theoretical. And I think that's exemplary, and I think everybody would think that. Is that I was worried by your example of Trafalgar Square. I just think it takes us to the heart of you know, in a sense, the big question is, if we know technically what good city making is, and we know it's about strategic design, why isn't there more of it? It takes you back to your London Trafalgar Square example, because that took an intervention by the elected London mayor, you know, to grab hold of the space and shape it in an act of governance and you know, municipal boldness that I don't see much example of in the Australian scene today. And I think for me, that link up between governance, imagination, and the city building skills needs to be reconnected, which is why the Committee for Sydney is interested in, you know, the governance issues for Sydney, because we think it might be the only way to reconnect these things. And the final thing, though, is about people. Because I think that given that the day is partly about who builds places, and I think the answer is at the moment nobody is doing placemaking in the way that we would like it. It's just places are happening to some degree, is people. This discussion about people, I'd like to end on this point, is we just did a piece of work as the Committee for Sydney looking at global talent, but also looking at the economic issues for an increasingly divided city. And I think Sydney is sleepwalking to a very divided city indeed, and we woke up a bit about it in London. The Olympics helped us to try and reconnect East and West so that the social outcomes and the environmental outcomes and the economic outcomes on the east side of the city, as an act of policy at this point in time, the London Mayor, Conservative, has bought into the idea that we need convergence between East and West in terms of outcomes in London in the next 20 years. That convergence objective is a fundamental structuring principle for a city, and I think we need to see more of this kind of thinking. On the people front, so what we discovered looking at global talent was that the future is, in terms of the graduate workforce, the future is increasingly female, and in Australia the workforce is going to be increasingly female and increasingly Asian. We then looked at where people lived in the city, and we found that, are you surprised to learn, British people without children live in Bondi and they live in Manly, and Asian talent with families live elsewhere, you know. So I think there's a question in my mind about whether some of our discussion is, in a sense, and our planning understanding is quite Eurocentric and has notions of density particularly, which need to be thought through, although I'm very clear in my own mind that agglomeration and density lead to successful economic, social, cultural cities, as it were. But I think there's an important discussion about who's going to be living in our cities in terms of this structural discussion about the future of our cities. What are they looking for? So we also came to the view, and I'm very proud we wrote about it in the Committee for Sydney document, it said we need to understand that the increasingly female graduate workforce is reshaping our cities, where they wish to live. People getting married at 30, 35, having families late, having 1 or 2 children, 2 graduate families. What's the structure of the city that fits this demographic shift? As we all know, there's an ideological discussion in Australia about the quarter-acre block versus the increasing demographic shift that is actually reshaping our cities on the ground. And by the way, just to reinforce a problem, is that most of the houses or homes built in Sydney are going towards the west, and most of the jobs are going to the east. So these are fundamental factors. Last point about people, I think, in terms of this essential discussion about, which Jan, I think, is totally on top of, in a very accessible way, about the structure of our city, is that we are, in a sense, there's a strange discussion going on about design for our city at the moment. Ideologically and in the media, we are losing the discussion, those of us who believe in density and those who believe that the best results for our city will come from conscious interventions, not neoliberal market non-interventions. Public-private partnering creates cities. I don't think we're winning the ideological argument, and indeed, I think people I talk to, and I live in Manly, the very word density drives them away. However, on the ground, demographic realities are creating an opportunity for a city that is going to be structured around a different ideology, if you like, but a different demographic reality. And in that, I think what we really need is Jan back to shape the planning department. Thank you very much indeed.